This is an open letter to Mr. Tucker Carlson and the Sane Society. Here's the thing, folks. They say all systems, they say all systems move towards equilibrium. Uh, and once equilibrium is achieved, then the system becomes stable. If this fundamental fact of physics is appreciated enough on your planet, um, then a lot of your problems are, cured, will be cured. If this simple fact of physical world that you live in, if this simple fact is appreciated enough, then you will live in a better world. The problem is it's not appreciated. You think you can squeeze the toothpaste cube from one side and not get toothpaste coming out from the other side. If you don't appreciate this, if you don't get this, as long as you don't get this, you will have all these issues. System goes towards equilibrium. If you squeeze one side, it will show up its effect in another side. And if you squeeze that side, then it will show up effects on this side. This is simple facts. Whether we are talking about economy, whether we are talking about immigration, whether we are talking about legal or illegal immigration, whether you're talking about uh, distribution of wealth within the population, anything you want to talk about, you have to consider that every action you take, naturally there is going to be a reaction that will result into an equilibrium, because the system always wants to go towards equilibrium, because that's where stability lies. So your incursion, physical or intellectual, either through the army or through the navy or through the CIA, overtly or covertly, your intrusion into another system will push the toothpaste to come out from the other side. There is this intrusion, they call it blowback. Yes, you can say illegal immigration is one blowback, one of the blowbacks. Terrorism is another one of those blowbacks, that you have intruded into somebody else's business, profits, profit margins, sense of ownership of the land. You have intruded into that, and the side effects are illegal immigration, which concerns you a lot, or legal immigration, which also concerns you a lot, because you want to keep your, identity, cultural identity, the same as it was handed to you. In order to keep the cultural identity the same way as it was handed to you, you feel responsible to keep that cultural identity that was handed to you by your fathers. You feel that responsibility. I understand. But in order to do that, you have to understand that you can't squeeze other areas on this planet and not expect their population to overflow into yours. The same way you can't expect to squeeze a toothpaste tube and not expect toothpaste coming out the other side. And to, the real world example, look at it this way. Vietnamese people didn't have representation in the white northern hemisphere. Then what happens? Vietnam War happens, and you find Vietnamese almost in all the countries of northern hemisphere. Majority in the Allies and majority in North America. who were involved in the Vietnam War. System goes towards equilibrium. And one of the issues is that because Vietnamese people didn't have representation in your, you know, in your system, so you decided to let's go and fight them, let's go and kill them. They weren't celebrated enough in your system in order to be worthy to stay alive or be looked upon as equal. They don't have representation. And you, this, because they don't have representation in your system, didn't have representation in your system, so they suddenly, their life became cheap. Their life and their property and their country became cheap, and it was ravaged through. Then they got representation. I kind of feel now there are enough Vietnamese in your system, in pink skin system, pink skin empire, that I kind of doubt there would be a second Vietnamese war, because there are so many Vietnamese in your system which will speak up. Another example, Palestine. You totally disregards the rights of those natives to exist in that land. So you squeeze the toothpaste tube. Well, a lot of Lebanese and Palestinians and Syrians and Egyptians have landed in your lands, in the West, in Northern Hemisphere, in the pink skin areas. Now they have representation. Now there is less chance that they would have been massacred and, genocide happening, but still happening. But still you see the protests. Because there's a genocide happening over here, and because these guys now have some representation in your system, now you have the protests. You see? Some representation and news travels. You ban TikTok. They get video emails of what's happening from Nigerian internet. So my point is this. Because you weren't wise enough to consider the rights of other people to exist without representation, you went after their very existence, so they had to run away from their land, come to your land, and now they have some representation in your system. And now the conflict within your system, because now those poor bastards have some representation. Before they didn't have any representation. The Palestinians and basically the Arabs. Now they have some representation, and now you see the protest. But then Glenn Beck comes up and says, why are they protesting? Shut the fuck up or go home. It's like, okay, they're protesting because they are from there. I mean, just like Glenn Beck is probably very proud of his British heritage. I guess that's where I think that's where he's from. And you're probably proud of your Scandinavian heritage, but and that's why you feel very bad if Uncle Sam's managers decided to bomb Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. You would feel really bad. It's like that's not good, and you probably will protest. The same goes with the other motherfuckers over there, the browns and the blacks and the yellows and the greens and the reds. They don't want to be bombed. And if they happen to have representation in your system because they were bombed at a time in the past, so they had to run away from their own land and end up in your land, now they have some representation. Now probably their interest is somewhat protected because they have some kind of representation in your system. Now there is a less chance of their land being bombed out of existence, as was the first time around. So you see where I'm going with this. So in short, if you want to keep your streets pure, and if you want to keep your culture, the culture that your parents handed to you, you want to hand it to your children, If you want that, the most important thing is don't squeeze the tube, the toothpaste tube, in other parts of this planet. Because system looks for equilibrium, you put pressure on them, they move out, they come to your land, and they dilute your system. They dilute your culture, change it from what it was to what it is to it is going to be. As simple as that. You don't want dilution, you don't want irrelevance, you don't want that, don't go over there. Keep it to your place. But then you've been doing this for a long time. If that was the case, the Europeans would have stayed in Europe. We would have stopped reproducing, stayed in Europe, keep Europe nice and beautiful. And in North America, we had another race of redskins. But that didn't happen. Why? Because Europeans decided that they're exceptional. Because they self-celebrated a lot. And they thought it's our God-given right to go squeeze the tube in North America. You squeezed it so bad that these guys didn't have any place to run to, and they all went 6 feet under. Now you're blaming the Africans and the Middle Easterns and South Americans from coming to your land. You don't want them. You're squeezing their tube, but you say, no, 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 you should die over there. Don't come to my place. I'm squeezing your tube, but just like the Redskins, you should die and go 6 feet under. We just want your land or your resources. If you die and go 6 feet under, that's preferable. Don't come to our land. You're moving against the laws of physics. Now technology has improved. Now they have boats and zodiacs and then inflatable boats and old boats and logs, and they try to move out. They don't want to go 6 feet under. They moved out of the conflict zone which you have produced. The pink skin empire comes up with these conflicts because they want to expand into Ukraine. They want to own a part of West Asia and East Asia in case of Taiwan. These are all, this is not, the natives haven't come to California from East Asia or West Asia trying to invade. But then when you go and try to invade them, you will get some of their population in your land. So your culture changes over time. You don't want that? Don't intrude into theirs. As simple as that. And don't and one of the best ways you can prevent this kind of actions, the action of intruding into other people's business, one of the main ways to stop that is to stop celebrating yourself so much. Consider that others are also celebratable, because when you start, I was just explaining to another a lady in NPR. When you celebrate yourself too much, you feel exceptional. When you feel exceptional, you feel you have the right to go teach them, whoever them is, poor bastards, how their economy should work, how their governance should work, how their culture should work. The moment you feel, you, during the time you keep celebrating yourself, you feel more and more exceptional until the point that you see yourself above and beyond other human beings. That's when you intrude into their land, into their tribe, in order to teach them, because you know it and you feel they don't know it. You know your ways, and they have their ways, but you feel their ways is not worth, it's worth shit, and your ways is the correct way, whether be it your religion, your civilization, your literature, your culture, your economy, your form of economy, your form of governments. When you see yourself above the rest, you give yourself the right to intrude in their business in order to help them, give them advice, show them the correct way. The result is war. The result is their population overflowing into your land. It's not that difficult to grasp. It's just not. It's physics. Stop blowing hot air up your own ass with your culture and your technology and your industry and how great we are and how smart we are. Stop celebrating yourself too much. You know, you can celebrate yourself enough that you wouldn't commit suicide as a person, individually, as a family, or as a nation. As long as you celebrate yourself enough not to commit suicide, that should be enough. Anything more than that is when you start elevating yourself relative to others a little too much. And then you become imperialist. And you feel you have the right to go in and teach them how it's done. And that ends up in war. And that pushes their population into your population. And that's why you have a brown British Prime Minister who thinks white, who acts white, but brown in complexion. Rishi Sunak doesn't own any mirrors. Most of these problems is the self-celebration part. Comes from the self-celebration part. You celebrate your culture a little too much, then you invade the next door or the other side of the planet, you push a bunch of them into your culture, and suddenly your culture changes. That's exactly the equilibrium part. But it's like you don't get it. I mean, when you have such a system that puts Dick Cheney in charge, Dick Cheney was a lineman. Dick Cheney is a lineman. You know, a lineman who puts high voltage cables on top of fucking electric towers. Had done it for many years. It's a lineman mentality. He has a lineman mentality. You put him in charge of this great self-celebratory machine. God. Again, a lot of harm has come from this self-celebration. Good enough self-celebration, good enough as long as it's enough to encourage you to continue living and not commit suicide. Anything more than that, it goes to your head. You feel superior. You elevate yourself, so therefore you feel superior. Therefore you give yourself, you dehumanize other people. Therefore you give yourself the right to go and, you know, tame these wild savages. Salute. Then the wild savages, in your view, the wild savages, come to your land and they bring their savage business to your land and you're upset. I'm sure you prefer that these wild savages either comply or die in their own land. Either comply to the pink skin or die in your own land. Don't come over here. That's the idea. But technology has improved. Boats are cheap now. Believe me, if the Redskins have some boats, I'm sure a lot of Redskins that could traverse the Atlantic and Pacific, I'm sure, you know, many of them would have ended up in Asia and Europe, just running away from the invading Europeans, invading Pinkskins. They didn't have any. They never was any need for boats. The land is so fruitful that they could have. They lived as hunter gatherers and they were happy. Now you're unhappy. Why do these people are using boats to come to our land and change our culture? I'm sorry, you're squeezing them. If you stop squeezing them, they will stop coming. Sanctions, embargoes, covert and overt forceful actions taken to destabilize their system because I don't know they're a little too nationalist for for your taste. They are also celebrating themselves, and how dare they celebrate themselves? They should celebrate Shakespeare, and they should celebrate us. Why are they celebrating themselves? Does it ring any bell? Salute.